Welcome to Boise Entrepreneur Week 2021, everyone. I'm really excited today to present you with Jeff Reynolds. Before I tell you a little bit more about Jeff, my name is Tiam Rastegar. I'm the Executive Director at Trailhead and the Co-Chair at Boise Entrepreneur Week. We are presenting you today with some youth content. Jeff Reynolds, the principal at Reynolds+Myers, a local company, a digital agency, if you will, that helps companies in the food and building industries evolve into modern marketers. And hopefully Jeff can explain a little bit more on what that actually means. Jeff also was the director of programming here at Trailhead, at the organization that I lead. So Jeff and I have a lot in common. We share some history, and I just think the world of him for many reasons. And some of those are going to become pretty evident here as we talk. So welcome, Jeff.
Fantastic to be here. I couldn't be more passionate about this topic just because I started into the business and sort of entrepreneurship path myself at a very young age. I mean, I was hustling at 12 years old. And so I really believe that this is, that basically great entrepreneurs are made, not born, but they can be made quite young, much younger than we generally think they can be.
It's perfect. And yes, we want to get the attention of those young budding entrepreneurs, those who may not know that they have the skill set or the wherewithal to become entrepreneurs. And Jeff, I've heard you very effectively teasing out the right questions and getting people to kind of ponder and reflect on whether entrepreneurship is right for them. So as we talk about youth, let me take just one step back. This talk is called Building Your Community. And as we think about our youth in Idaho, high school students, collegiate students, you started at 12. My son is 13. I don't want to exclude them. They're all, part of the target audience here. But what do we actually mean when we say building your community?
Yeah. I mean, the concept behind building your community is simply that this journey, this entrepreneurship journey, isn't really a solo journey, right? Like we so often hold these gurus up on a pedestal, the Steve Jobs of the world, right, on a pedestal. And the reality is, as cliche as it is, nobody gets anywhere alone. And what that really means when we have to take that concept and turn it into action is we have to think about who are the others? Who's the team? How do I do this? And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the people in your world that can help support you and that you can help support them and to make things happen. And that effectively becomes your community. And that community starts today. I mean, that community, Tiam, like you and I could potentially be part of that community for anybody that reaches out, today. That's the reality. Like, matter of fact, from past talks that I've given both on the youth track and other tracks, many of the relationships start right here, and I guess if I could get, this first sort of the subject out, it's that concept that I just said, but then the action is really, how do you do that? And I think that's what those two things, sort of the what and the how, are what we hope to talk about today.
I like that, the what and the how, and the three layers of the brain. Let me for a moment pick on the why, because the what and the how will contextualize the why, right? And so you and I have talked about this sort of, leading up to this, not really knowing that we're going to record this talk. It's just because we get to work on programs together. But there's seemingly this barrier between youth that I get to work with through programs at Trailhead, and let's call it the adult world. I don't want to call it the real world, because then I'm implying that youth lives in some alternative world, which, thank you, air quotes there. Yeah. But, you and I have had the opportunity to work with some pretty young, brilliant minds, yeah, and quickly figured out that they were sort of trying to figure out where they belong in this adult world, right? And so I'm a big proponent of sort of building those bridges between those two worlds, because quite frankly, they're the same world, right? And yeah, so when growing up, I always had sort of, informal mentors, not knowing that they were helping me sort of bridge the world and bringing me into this other world. And it really more represented a shift in mindset more than anything else. But tell me a little bit about, you said in past talks, you were able to build relationships. If someone is watching this talk right now and they're either in high school or in college and they really want to figure out how to build their community, do they reach out to you? Do they shoot you an email? Do they find you on LinkedIn? Sort of give me the how, the very first steps on starting to build.
Well, I'm just one example. You're just one. We're just two examples, I guess, when you add it up, right? But I guess, the whole point is to reach out. And in my mind, the key skill is, you talked about there's like a wall or a barrier, and we all have to figure out how to get up, over, through, or under those barriers. And that's what entrepreneurship really is at its root. And so sort of connecting with those mentors is just a first baby step. So for me, of course, anybody can find me. LinkedIn is fine. Email me, chat through here, message TM. Any of those things are fine, or my company, Reynolds+Myers.com. Any of those things you can find me. But the real point is you have to start with the mindset that you believe that you can do it and you should do it and that you are part of it. And as cheesy as it sounds, I'm here to say that you can and you are part of it. You can do it and you are part of it. And so I view it as like a 3-step process. Basically, first you have to, and I was just writing this down while you were talking because you reminded me of it, is you have to believe you can be the one to solve it. You have to be able to identify whatever the it's are going to be, the problems of the world. You have to believe you can solve the problems of the world. You have to see and identify those problems of the world, and then you have to act. So do something to solve those problems of the world. And even if and what I think today we're talking about is one step in acting is that community. It's reaching out and finding those mentors. The other thing I would say, when I was 12, 13, my mentors were books and Inc. magazine for me back in the day. That really provided that bridge. I remember having this book that was I can't remember the title of it, but it was something like Young Entrepreneurs. And it was like a book of profiles of young entrepreneurs. And it was published by Inc. magazine. I remember that, but it was a book. And that book really sort of inspired me to like, wow, if these people can do it, I can do it. And I was, this, I was raised as a poor kid, inner city Portland, welfare kid. And so those books found at the Hollywood Portland library really were the first steps in providing that bridge in that belief. So I guess I'm trying to I'm trying to answer your question about me. Yeah, just reach out to me or TM, but it's not about that. It's really about what can you do to start the process of first believing and then starting to take the steps towards acting on that belief.
So I love that. So you found the genesis of your belief was rooted in those magazines. You saw others who did it, and then you were able to reflect on yourself and say, if they did it, I can do it. I think there are plenty of sources to inspire youth and for them to find their beliefs. I'm not gonna rattle off and put Shark Tank in the middle here, but I think entrepreneurship as a whole has anchored itself in society on a different level than when you and I were growing up, where we had to seek out, industry specific magazines or things of that nature. Problem solving as a whole has just become more mainstream. So let's say youth, they have the belief that they can do it, and they've identified the problem, or they're in the process of identifying the thing. Any pointers on the identification step before we get to the act?
Well, I think when you're first starting and you're looking at this journey, trying to solve problems that you have is sort of the natural fit, right? And I'm just so I guess that's my thought. It's just teaching yourself how to pay attention to the world around you, and then B, when you're paying attention to those things, sort of see them. I don't know what I'm trying to say is like paying attention to them and looking at them as like, what are the root problems here, that what's going on here, and sort of analyzing it. And that's why it's so good to start with problems that you face, because you understand them better. And
that's a really good point. So start in your own backyard, sort of, right? And that 100%. Implies, I don't want to call it expertise, but it implies that you have some relation to the problem.
Yeah, can we talk about that? Because I think, first of all, I hate the word youth. I think it's a stupid word. it's like just an ugly, like as an English language word. Like it sounds so, I don't know. Like they're like, like they're an other, and of course, I think what we're talking about when we're using that word is we're assuming that people with sort of less life experience, right? And so they haven't had a lot of experience in the workforce or whatever, so they don't really know what's going on. And I would say, if you take the community mindset around that, knowing less is actually a strength, not a weakness. A lot of the best things in the world. I can't think of a company that I've started, just about, and I've got a few under my belt, but most of them came from not knowing any better, not from my great expertise. That's what triggered me on this rant. Use the phrase expertise.
There's an irony here, though, right? So I see people with less life experience entering the conference room, and knowing that they know less or have less life experience automatically makes them want to be quiet and not assertive and not putting themselves out there. So there's an irony. You're saying it's quite the opposite. Now, why is that?
Well, what I'd say is a beginner's mind in solving any problem is a distinct competitive advantage. Meaning, if you have the mindset of, I know everything and I know all the solutions, then you never gain the skills. That is your actual barrier. I'm actually not necessarily saying that, if you don't know a lot and you're in the room, that you should still sit there and yammer on about stuff you don't know what you're talking about. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying you can listen and learn. And that is the most important thing.
Gotcha. So not knowing does not mean you do not belong. Find out, right?
Yeah, right. Find out if you belong. It's the exercise of digging through that. And I'll also say this, I'm obsessed right now with this concept of culture, and I'm obsessed in the culture in the macro sense of sort of like societal cultures, and the differences between societies, and then down to organizational level, right? And the thing about that is there are cultural norms that are helpful to have, right? So if you're a bit younger than everybody else, coming off as a know-it-all or whatever doesn't help you build the community, because in our culture, there is some of those negatives of what you just said, where people sort of think down on people, or sort of like the "who are you for speaking up" thing, Mm-hmm. And what I'm trying to say is, I think it's good to be sensitive to the cultural norms, understand how to play the game that you're playing, but not knowing in and of itself is absolutely not a reason to not move forward.
So I guess what I'm thinking of as you talk about not knowing is when companies get disrupted in the marketplace, right? They operate on their plan A. It's their bread and butter. They do that very well. And because they think they know their customer and the marketplace, they're not going to be very light on their feet. Now, another player entering the marketplace who isn't bound by those same beliefs, or call it the ladder of inference, the same experiences, may have something else to offer, or is in a way capable of uncovering things that the incumbent isn't able to uncover. So okay.
I'll tell you, I never feel so old as when I am sitting here asking my daughter, who is 17, questions about TikTok, so I can give clients, I can have better understanding, and I can give clients better input on this. I'm old. It's silly. I'm 46, but there are cultures that I don't understand. So what just like a younger person may not understand, business meeting culture, I don't understand TikTok culture. So what? We're just all different. So use the strengths that you have to sort of break through,
And one other thing that's an important element of the building the community is one's reputation. You've alluded to some of these cultural norms. I see them on a daily basis in terms of your reputation. Sort of, at least this is the belief, can dictate your path, and so. For those of us who don't have as much life experience or don't quite have a reputation yet, what are some of the things they want to think about as they build that reputation that then they'll take into that community?
Yeah, that's great. I think the starter point here is that it all starts now. Like, not to say that if you goof up or, whatever, you're, a slacker for a while. I was a slacker for quite a while. Like that is like going to run with you forever. But the truth is, if you can begin building that reputation, now positive reputation, it will carry for a long time, or it's more like a ladder that you're climbing up. You start here and you build that reputation. So what number one thing is, these are like things that your parents teach you, I hope. It's things like, do what you say you're going to do. Work hard. Be kind. These are not, become skilled. Work to become skilled. Put in the effort to become skilled. Communicate. Be honest. These are, I know I didn't list anything like learn how to sell or anything. These are all like character traits. And the thing is, by having high quality character traits, you build like sort of micro trusts, like trusts in a relationship, with like you and I, for example, that then we will then feel more comfortable introducing you to the next person, right? So like, I think a real thing to understand is like most people really want to help people starting out in just about anything, whether they're young or old, doesn't matter. People want to help, but the fear is that I'm going to refer you to somebody and that you're going to not live up to that referral, and it's going to reflect poorly on me and my reputation and my reputational currency. So being a person that people feel comfortable introducing and referring to people is probably the best sort of mental model to think about it. So don't think about it as what's in it for me. Think about it as in how do I make TM or Jeff or whoever feel good about referring me?
Very good point. And then when I talk to the person Jeff referred me to, I should keep in mind that Jeff has stuck out his neck for me, and this interaction is still reflective of right. Jeff introducing me, right? So that goes into reputation and building community. Let's switch gears real quick to breaking through that barrier a bit more. I really like when you go top 3, top 2, here's the number one thing. Those are very actionable things, we all can do. And so let's talk about the barrier a little bit. I have spent probably the last 18 months explaining to my kids, using the pandemic, explaining to them that, see, adults don't have all the answers. No. See, we screw up all the time. Now, we may pretend that we have all the answers, and that's part of maybe a cultural norm, but you all just saw how this adult world just basically fell apart in terms of leadership, decision-making, and having the answers, right? Now, when I grew up, it was pretty clear that if I needed answers, or if I needed anything taken care of, the adults in the room would be able to do that, and me not so much. I actually think this is a very good opportunity for us to turn the tables a little bit. What's your take on this?
I 100% agree with that. It's so funny, as sort of hard and challenging as this couple of years have been, I don't want to just repeat what you just said, but the sort of power structures and authority structures have proven their incompetence. And the positive of that, and that's not a political statement, that's a general, like it's at multiple levels, a lot of things going on. I mean, even the slow development of these remote tools, for example, it seems like some of that should have been able to be turned on faster. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is we should take all this as like, holy cow, this is a huge opportunity. These guys, I shouldn't confuse positions of power and authority with competence or solutions. So just because somebody has power or authority, now we talked about those cultural norms. I'm glad we kind of set up. We still have to be sensitive to that because that's sort of part of the rules of the game, sort of the implied game, and understanding that you're in that game. But separating the game from the reality, and the reality is she with the best ideas most likely, or has a great chance of actually winning the game. She with the best ideas has a great chance of winning the game. That doesn't mean, don't confuse that the people with power or authority have the actual competence to win the game. And I'm not trying to, that sounds like I'm trying to sow seeds of distrust. It's not so much that as my view is more like, how do you empower yourself to seize, with that knowledge, to seize the understanding, seize that understanding and turn it into something. So I don't know. I hope that all made sense. It was sort of a ramble. I think it did. You're touching on something that in one of the tools I use when I help boards in particular with their development plans is
I try to explain to them that the person with authority is never the right person to drive change. And I explain to them in a long-winded way, but you can do the shortcut and just read The Iceberg is Melting, super short book on penguins losing their iceberg. But the point there is that, as an agent of change, and this is transferable to what we're talking about, you really need to find the advocates, and who are the advocates? The advocates are those without the formal titles. The advocates are actually those who the peers look to for leadership, guidance, and they sort of mimic what they do. And I see a lot of opportunity for, the folks that I work with in those, You Lead Idaho program, for example, amongst their peers, they turn out to be subject matter experts. And I see that that their students, their peers, actually look to them more than they look to their teacher or me for advice on how to do it. Now, formally, they do listen when I talk, back to your cultural norms. But when the rubber hits the road, I think they orient themselves after those who have basically shown to them that they know what they're talking about. They'll be there for them. They have that reputation that you and I talked about. Yep. So, no, it totally made sense. And
can I also just say, the huge thing that you just mentioned was making change. And entrepreneurship, that is what entrepreneurship is, in my opinion. By definition, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you are not settling for the status quo. And therefore, you are an agent of change. And that change it's not about money. Money may be the result of some kinds of change. Bezos is a billionaire because he's touched billions of people. So, but that's not the reason. If you're a change, whether you're working on sort of social entrepreneurship or other sort of societal empowerment changes, that's what this is all about. And so what you need to do in forming the community is band together with people who are also open to making change. And that change rarely comes from the existing power structure. Rarely, I can't tell you how many times an entrepreneur will come to me and say, oh, I got this great idea for all these problems. This company's, whatever, IBM is doing all these things all wrong, and I'm going to fix that. It's like, no, you're way better to go over and do something different and to challenge that and create that change than try to sell it up through that existing power structure. When I was at Trailhead, Marcus Negrin said something. He's an entrepreneur, video game entrepreneur, among other things. He said something to me. He said, Jeff, don't bother with trying to change the culture. This was his way of saying this. Create a subculture and attract people to it. And what he was saying, and that's how you make the change. So the change is not going direct at the problem. It's creating a community that is focused on a subculture, and eventually the status quo sort of moves to you instead of you moving to it or trying to change it.
Small subcultures to disrupt the culture, if that's the intent. You don't necessarily have to disrupt and replace, but you build your own, right? And they're not always competing either. If we're telling folks, hey, the burden of changing the world is on you, that's one thing, but we're really encouraging them to carve out new cultures and new communities that fit them.
That's a topic for a whole talk. This idea that the pie isn't fixed. So, I use Jeff Bezos as an example, and there's, I'm sure people that's like fingers on a chalkboard for some people. But the reality is Jeff Bezos grew the pie. He created ways of selling that we didn't know were possible. And the pie, we aren't all fighting over the same pie. We are building, there are infinite pies or one infinitely large pie. And so, yeah, I'm saying disrupt. I think what I'm saying is like, let the people who are happy doing the thing that they want to do the thing, and then go over here and focus on your version of change or building what you want. And you'll probably have a lot higher likelihood of winning.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to make sure I touch on one thing before we quote unquote run out of time here. If I am participating in any kind of youth content this year at Boise Entrepreneur Week, let's say I form a team and I participate in the Youth Innovation Challenge, which all of you should do, by the way. and I'm in the beginning of forming my community. The team becomes the community who I'm now going to problem solve with, right? I have seen many different styles. Some work well, some do not work so well. But I've also seen the ones that work well be really crystal clear about the problem they're trying to solve, right? And so in terms of actionable steps, how do I go about discovering my customer and figuring out, is the problem that I'm solving actually a problem? Let's get task oriented, let's get a bit tactical here.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think about how to put this within the framing of the community focus, but I'm struggling a little bit because what's interesting to think about is that while the entrepreneur journey is definitely a sort of a team effort and a community effort, there's a lot of solo work that goes into that, right? And I think some of what you're talking about is that solo work, although you might be able to divide and conquer and do that. So, okay, so Todd, we call that phase of sort of company development, customer discovery. And there's sort of like two parts of that. There's the problem definition, which is like, what am I actually solving? Like, what is the problem here? And then there's sort of the customer part of that in terms of how they experience that problem. And you really have to have an understanding of both sides. In other words, it's sort of like a chicken and the egg problem. Sometimes you'll come to it from a deep customer understanding, especially if you're the customer. You just know it because you've seen it. And otherwise, you might become a little bit outside. You need to be more formal in defining that problem. So your question was really, what are the steps I can do to make sure I have an actual problem? So, it's not enough just to have a problem that you're trying to solve. You really need to have the right, I'll just say that, let me put it another way. Certain problems give you a better chance of success than other problems. So
the more you can don't equple problems.
Not all problems are created equal. So like the Jeff Bezos example, I'll just keep down that one. What made the problems that he was solving, and let's just go back to the old days when he was just selling books, right? In 1998 or whatever. And all he is, selling books online. But the core problems were still the same. Back then, bookstores had limited availability. And so I go to a bookstore and they wouldn't have what I needed. So he could solve that via the internet and ship a book to me, right? Now he does that with any number of things, right? Or they do that with any number of things. So the cool thing about that problem was that I feel it. In other words, it's a big pain. It's as a customer, I notice the problem. So that's a pretty obvious thing. Is this a problem that's noticeable to your customer? I would want to act on that. It's painful because it takes my time. So is this a problem that's painful? I'd want to act on that. And is this a problem that is urgent? Does it affect me? Like if I really am trying to get a book and then I have to go down to, in the old days, Barnes and Noble or whatever, my local bookstore, and then they don't have it, then they have to order it and it takes 10 days when I could just order it on Amazon and back then maybe get it in 3 or 4 days, then that's a difference in urgency. So I guess I'm trying to say that looking at your problem through these lenses, and there are other ones we probably don't have time to cover, but if looking at trying to understand your customer's problem and understanding how it actually affects them, and a good one is sort of base litmus test: is it urgent? Is it frequent?
I really like the urgency part of what you said, because if you notice a problem, that's one thing. If the problem hurts, that's another thing. But if your threshold for that pain is still way out there, and it's not even on the radar, it means it's not urgent. So that was one element of customer discovery that we had a really hard time conveying, because urgency to some isn't necessarily urgency to others. And so, nailing that, quantifying that urgency was something I know our team struggled with. And there wasn't a clear-cut answer in ways of quantifying it.
Yeah, and a lot of times I might try to get a sense of urgency by having just to make sure what we're talking about. We're talking about like talking to customers. We're talking to prospective customers, right? And if you're solving a problem for veterinarians, going and having a conversation with veterinarians and say, "Oh, do you experience this problem?" "Yes, I experience this problem. Tell me how that affects your life." And listening to them. And this is a real key thing. Like nobody's going to say, "Oh, I have a real urgency to solve that problem." That's very rare. You are listening for the cues that imply that they have urgency around it, right? Like, if if they're desperate, if they're willing to pay a lot of money, if it costs them money, if it costs them time, and they're willing to take action, if they're actually currently taking action now. So like a great way to find there's urgency about a problem is when people have some janky, goofy solution to solving it right now, right? Like they've created this stupid spreadsheet. I mean, one of the companies I was involved, that was the situation I walked into. That, you know, the problem had been solved with PowerPoints and spreadsheets and sort of, you know, baling wire and, you know, whatever parts and pieces they could find. And that was a clue to me that that was a real problem, because otherwise they wouldn't have put all that effort into that janky solution.
So you look for the workarounds and they become opportunities for solutions. It's interesting you say that. I talked to a venture capitalist, very well-known venture capitalist here in Idaho. They're not from Idaho, but they're well-known here. And I said, look, there's a lot of SaaS companies right now popping up left and right, you know, between here and Salt Lake. I said,
software as a service. Software as a service. SaaS.
Thank you. Software as a service, SaaS. And this person frankly said, well, it's easy, Tim. Go find a company. Step 1. Step 2, find their spreadsheet. Step 3, build a SaaS product to replace that spreadsheet.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, one of our companies is a company called Net Camps. We do sports camp registration, you know, for BSU and camps all over the country. And all we are is sort of a paper replacement, right? Like a lot of times your competition for the product or idea that you have isn't a company, isn't somebody else doing it. It's literally a notepad, a spreadsheet, or doing nothing. You know, it's not like a lot of times that's the actual sort of competitive set that you're operating in.
Yeah, very, very subtle, very, very subtle things. You know, I'll throw this out. The customer empathy map helps me remind myself to look for those subtle, not obvious, hey, would you buy option B to replace option A? Pretty obvious question, but you got to kind of dig and peel the onion in between.
That's right. And the thing that so people will not like this.
Then I definitely want to air this, so go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, usually they don't like to hear this, but it's the truth. You don't get the sense of urgency or those sort of subtle things until you've talked to dozens of people, usually. Dozens, if not 100 prospective customers. I'm not saying that should stop you from moving on one track and doing stuff and, you know, continuing, you know, your own solution and sort of your pilot solution to it. But the reality is it's very rare that one person or a couple customers will bring enough clarity to you for you to act on. So quantity matters in this game. And that's where your community comes in, because if you aren't figuring out how to get beyond your own little social circle, then you risk being stuck in a bubble that is not reality. So if you can use your networking, I hate that word too, but your networking skills, you know, your skills of helping other people and asking other people for help to sort of expand that circle to do more of those customer interviews, you really increase your odds. That
was a huge takeaway. Help others first and then ask for help. It's a reciprocal game.
Yeah, listen.
Well, hey,
I'm sorry. I know you do that. Not to cut you off. I know we got to go. But back to this very core community idea. We are all connected. And if we are doing this in person, we would be able to, you know, draw the sort of 1 or 2 or 3 degrees of separation probably from everybody between us and everybody that's watching. And so the game is really figuring out how to be a useful enough person to the community and your community that they sort of sign on to help you versus you having to push the rock up the hill or sell or being seen as a salesperson trying to take something from them. It's much more powerful to be a giving person and really focus your energy on helping them, whatever your version of them is. So
yeah, the takeaway is I try to get shoulder to shoulder with those who you're trying to help. That's really important. Look, I do want to wrap up. I think we started off with, the what and how of building your community. And what I love about conversations that I have with you is it's never just a conversation we set out to have, and I learn a ton. But we also talked about, the what and how of solving problems and some of the intricacies to look for as a problem solver. I really think this talk is going to give some actionable direction to some of these folks who are going to pick problem statements. So the Youth Innovation Challenge is basically a reverse pitch comp where we will provide them with problem statements, and high school students and college students will then go out and try to solve them. And, the best pitchers will get cash from us. And I really think them watching this before they go off and pick the problem and then go solve the problem is going to be really useful. And I want to thank you for that, Jeff.
No, for me, it's just me sitting in my basement today, ranting. So I appreciate the opportunity. And I'm just glad people are here and doing this and taking steps. Because even if you decide that it's not for you, that's fine. The skills you learn pursuing entrepreneurship concepts will make you more aware in sort of the world. And, just for me, make it really help you build a rewarding life. Because if you learn how to solve problems, it's fun.
I agree with you more. I think those transferable skills that come out of entrepreneurship, and it's funny with me, I'm not an entrepreneur originally. I'm kind of, the pendulum is swinging in that way. But if you think about what you just said, those transferable skills will make you a better employee. Yeah. If that's what you want to be, they could potentially make you a better father, a better husband, better member of your community. And I know those all sound like big, fluffy, words that I'm throwing out. But what I'm learning, the common denominator with entrepreneurs is that these transferable skills around problem solving, people skills, and a little bit of selling, quite frankly, are skills that serve you well, whether you start a business or not.
Yep.
And with that, let's close this talk and wish the participants of the Youth Innovation Challenge best of luck. I hope they don't choose my problem because I'm going to make it complicated. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.